Julian Hemsley hadn't moved to Montecito for inspiration. He had come for work, more precisely, reputation work. His job, described in a language so corporate it felt like theater, was narrative alignment. A fixer of stories, a weaver of softer edges around sharper public figures. His latest assignment, however, was unlike anything he'd faced. This wasn't a politician. This was Meghan Markle. And the world didn't want a makeover. It wanted proof. He had been watching the children for weeks. Not closely, not creepily, just watching how they moved through the garden. Archie with his dirty feet, his tendency to squat near the soil, digging for worms. Lilibet with her endless questions about where fruit comes from and whether plants have birthdays. The staff was careful not to interrupt them. Doria had insisted on that. But Julian saw something else in those afternoons, a story waiting to be told. The idea came to him in fragments, during a phone call with a London publicist who had said something about rebuilding from the roots. He had jotted it down. Roots. From there, everything clicked. Children, vegetables, local market, fresh air, camera phones, smiling strangers. It would feel honest, even if every element was guided. He didn't bring it up to Meghan at first. That would have been premature. Meghan didn't like ideas handed to her. She preferred to find them, so he played it carefully. He mentioned how popular farmers' markets had become for families. He left a copy of Kinfolk magazine open to an article on generational gardening. He even, once, brought a mason jar of beet juice into a meeting and said it reminded him of his childhood. Meghan had raised an eyebrow, and then Harry mentioned carrots. They were having lunch outside, and Harry leaned over and said Archie had been obsessed with carrots lately. Couldn't stop pulling them up too early. Wanted to wash them himself. Wanted to sell them, even. Julian's ears twitched. That was the hook. A father's offhand comment. He tucked it away. Later that day, Julian spoke with Marco, the logistics man, the one who knew every calendar entry and gate code. Marco was a man of routine and resistance. When Julian mentioned the vegetable stand, Marco sighed heavily and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Then he asked what the security footprint would look like, how many hours the children would be exposed, what kind of produce would even qualify. Julian had answers. He always did. 2 days later, a quiet proposal landed on Meghan's desk. Not flashy. Just an idea. Little roots. A weekend garden table with the kids. No branding. No media invite. Just wholesome intention. Meghan didn't respond immediately. She flipped the folder closed and returned to her emails. But that night, over dinner, she brought it up. Not as a pitch, but as a maybe. Maybe Archie could try it. Maybe Lilibet could paint the sign. Maybe they'd keep it small. Julian nodded. He didn't smile yet. Not until she turned to her assistant and asked for local market permits. From there, it moved quickly. Julian contacted a carpenter from Ojai to build the stand. Not too polished, just rustic enough to photograph well. He brought in a young UCLA grad named Noah who specialized in children's eco-education but also had experience with on-site press management. Noah would be the buffer between authenticity and control. When Harry found out, he was amused. Not excited, just curious. He told Archie he could sell the carrots if he washed them properly. He helped carry crates from the garden to the garage. Meghan designed small hand-printed tags that read, "Grown by Archie and Lily." Julian smiled when he saw them. She was in. Fully dot on the morning of the event, Julian arrived early, wearing his usual white linen shirt and a soft grin. He stood at the edge of the gravel path, coffee in hand, watching the sun stretch over the hedges. The stand was already set. Noah was arranging cucumbers in gentle diagonals. Archie was hopping from one foot to the other, nervous and thrilled. And then Meghan arrived, sunglasses on, holding Lilibet's hand. No entourage, no photographers. Just her family and a table full of vegetables. Julian didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The story had already started. By 9 a.m., the Montecito farmers market was alive with soft jazz from a nearby booth and the rustle of canvas tents in the breeze. Julian arrived 10 minutes earlier than scheduled, as he always did, and positioned himself just far enough from the little root stall to observe without appearing obvious. He adjusted his sunglasses and watched as Noah unpacked the basket scale. Carrots, tomatoes still speckled with earth. It looked perfectly imperfect. Deliberately unpolished. Archie stood beside the table, fingers tracing the edges of the wooden crate that held their zucchinis. His overalls were slightly too big, choice Meghan had insisted on for charm. Lilibet leaned against her mother's leg, clinging to a small watering can she had insisted on bringing from home. Meghan knelt down and whispered something in Archie's ear. The boy nodded, though the corners of his mouth were twitching with nerves. Then Harry walked up, holding 2 reusable canvas bags and a folded newspaper under his arm. He hadn't shaved, hadn't dressed up, and made no effort to appear princely. He glanced toward the parking lot first, scanned for cameras, then positioned himself casually beside a nearby coffee truck. His eyes never left the children. Noah prompted Archie to speak to a couple passing by with their dog. Archie looked up and stumbled over the words. Then he repeated them, louder, clutching a bunch of carrots with both hands. The couple smiled, bought 2, and complimented his handwriting on the price tags. Meghan clapped quietly behind the stand and crouched to wipe a speck of dirt off Lilibet's cheek. Julian noted how many passers-by slowed down, pretended not to recognize them, and then circled back. The vibe was controlled, gentle, oddly wholesome. He opened his phone and typed a few notes for later, but not everything was going to script. Just after noon, a man with a weathered face and a notepad in his shirt pocket approached the table. His name was Richard Langley, though few recognized him. He had been a food columnist once, now semi-retired, writing think pieces for a small digital magazine read mostly by chefs and restaurateurs. He watched Archie hand over a paper bag to a woman in yoga pants, then stepped forward. He pointed to a basket of heirloom tomatoes. Then he asked where they were grown. Archie hesitated. He glanced at Meghan. Meghan nodded slightly but didn't speak. Archie shifted his weight and said they came from our garden. Richard tilted his head and asked if he helped plant them. Archie said he helped water them, sometimes. Richard asked if he knew what heirloom meant. Archie shook his head. There was no malice in Richard's tone, but his questions pulled tension into the air like static. Julian moved a step closer, signaled Noah with a subtle hand flick. Noah stepped in, redirected Richard with a comment about crop rotation. Richard chuckled and walked away, but Julian could feel the moment cracking. Inside the family car parked discreetly down the street, Marco monitored everything from a live feed. The cameras meant only for security captured enough. He radioed the driver to stay on alert. He didn't like the lingering dot back at the stand. The line thinned. Meghan whispered something to Lilibet, who now sat on a tiny stool beside the table, picking petals off a marigold. Harry approached the stand briefly, handed Archie a bottle of water, and gave him a quiet thumbs up. Then he turned back around and disappeared behind the nearby juice vendor. It wasn't long before the whispers turned into digital noise. A TikTok account with just under 15,000 followers had uploaded a clip of Archie saying the word heirloom with confusion. Within an hour, the comments started, "PR stunt, they didn't grow that," scripted smile. The kind of noise Julian had learned to ignore but knew Meghan wouldn't. He watched her reading her phone by the side of the stand, thumb pausing on the screen. Then she placed it face down on the wooden ledge and walked over to Archie. She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and handed him a handful of basil to place in the basket. Archie didn't ask why. He just did it. Later, as the sun tilted west and the foot traffic slowed, Meghan turned to Noah and thanked him. She then asked if they could pack up quietly. No announcements. No closing sale. Just a quiet end. Julian stayed until the last crate was lifted into Marco's SUV. He watched as Meghan buckled Lilibet into her seat, smoothed Archie's hair, and closed the door. Then she walked around the car and stood still for a moment, facing the wind. She wasn't smiling now. As the SUV rolled away, Julian stood alone by the now empty stand. The chalkboard sign still read, "Grown with Love." He didn't erase it. Instead, he took a photo. Not for the press. For himself. To remember how carefully constructed truth could still unravel, even under a cloudless sky. That night, long after the crates had been unloaded and the leftover produce stacked neatly in the pantry fridge, Harry found himself staring out the kitchen window. The Montecito house was quiet, save for the distant whir of the garden sprinklers. He stood barefoot, still in the same shirt from earlier, a glass of water in his hand and an ache in his chest that he couldn't explain. Meghan had gone upstairs hours ago with Lilibet. Archie had fallen asleep on the living room couch, still, clutching the stub of a crayon he had used to doodle signs earlier that morning. Harry hadn't moved him. He just covered him gently with the edge of a throw blanket and sat nearby for a while, pretending to read, but now the house felt heavier. Something about the day had stuck in his throat. Not the market itself. Not the vegetables or the heat or even the awkward encounter with that man, the one who had asked Archie too many questions. What bothered Harry was something quieter. The look on Meghan's face when she scrolled through her phone. The way Archie had glanced toward her before answering even the simplest question. And worst of all, the flicker of confusion in Archie's eyes when he was asked whether he'd planted the tomatoes. Harry took a slow sip of water and then poured the rest into the sink. He left the glass there and padded toward the hallway. On the way, he passed Julian's room, the door closed, a faint line of light beneath it. No doubt Julian was writing up tomorrow's narrative brief. Harry didn't knock. Instead, he went to the mudroom, pulled on a hoodie, and walked out into the backyard. The air was cooler now, the garden dimly lit by the soft glow of solar lights tucked among the rosemary. He walked along the stone path, past the raised beds. The tomatoes were still there, hanging in clusters. He reached out and touched one. Firm, real, and yet somehow not what they had claimed. He stood there for several minutes, breathing in the scent of earth and mint. Then he crouched down, grabbed a nearby trowel, and began digging. Slowly, methodically. Not because he needed to plant anything, just to feel the soil in his hands. The next morning, Harry woke early. Before Meghan, before Julian. Before the emails and strategy calls. He made toast, packed a cooler with leftover vegetables, grabbed 2 folding chairs from the garage, and gently nudged Archie awake. Archie rubbed his eyes and blinked up at him. Harry knelt beside the couch and whispered the plan. No signs. No camera people. No handlers. Just the two of them and a little table. Archie looked unsure at first, but then he nodded. They drove to a quieter part of town, not the market. Just a shady spot near the corner bakery. Harry unfolded the table, laid out the produce, and helped Archie write 25 cents on a piece of cardboard using the same crayon from the night before. Then they sat and waited. The first customer was a man walking his dog. He asked if the tomatoes were any good. Harry nodded and handed him a sample. The man took one, bit into it, smiled, and dropped $1 on the table. He didn't ask for change. Others followed. A woman in scrubs, a cyclist, a teenager who just wanted a photo but didn't take one. No media, no whispers. Just quiet exchanges and a few coins in a mason jar. Harry didn't check his phone once. He just watched Archie beam every time someone took a carrot. Back at home, Meghan came down the stairs looking for them. She checked the kitchen, then the garden. When she couldn't find them, she called Marco. Marco answered and simply said they were safe. When she asked where, he paused before replying and then gave her the corner location. She didn't interrupt. She didn't drive over. She just stood at the window, phone still in her hand, staring out toward the distant hills. By noon, Harry and Archie returned. Archie burst through the door, waving the handful of coins they had earned. Meghan met them in the entryway. She crouched to listen as Archie recounted how a dog sniffed the cucumbers and someone called their carrots perfect. Harry watched her closely. He didn't speak. She didn't ask why they'd gone without her. Later that evening, as they tucked the kids into bed, Meghan placed a hand on Harry's arm and held it there a moment longer than usual. Neither of them said what they were thinking, but something had shifted. Not in strategy. Not in the narrative. In the family. Julian knew the tone of a message before he read it. The subject line simply read restructure, Little Roots Initiative. He clicked it anyway. The memo was short, dry, and signed with initials instead of names. It explained that the pilot phase of the children's farmer's stall had achieved sufficient visibility for intended media objectives and would now be retired. No mention of continuation, no expansion, no next step. He sat back in the sunroom, the light creeping across the tile as morning moved forward without his permission. His espresso had gone cold. His plans, more robust than anyone suspected, now sat dormant in a folder titled Phase 2. He had lined up a seed brand partnership, a short film series, and even a children's gardening toolkit branded under the Little Roots name. None of it mattered now. Julian closed his laptop and looked out at the garden. From where he sat, he could see the top of the greenhouse Meghan had insisted on building last year. It was supposed to be symbolic, a return to simplicity. But nothing in this house had ever been simple. He rose slowly, smoothed his shirt, and walked out to the driveway where Marco stood inspecting the tires of the black SUV. Marco didn't say anything. He rarely did unless required. But he glanced up when Julian approached. Julian asked whether the kids would be going back to the market. Marco shook his head once, then returned to checking the pressure gauge. That was the answer. Elsewhere in town, someone else was still thinking about that stand. Richard Langley sat in a corner booth of a quiet cafe, his laptop open in front of him. He had started writing an article the same evening of the second outing, the unscripted one. He hadn't planned to write about it. He didn't even take notes that day. But something about the sight of Prince Harry, unshaven and calm, sitting beside his barefoot son on a folding chair with a single crate of cucumbers, refused to leave his head. He called the article The Prince and the Peppers. In it, he didn't accuse or praise. He simply described. He described the quiet, the patience, the unbranded table, the way the boy looked up at his father every time someone stopped by. He ended the piece with a question: when is a carrot just a carrot? When no one's watching. The article was published in a modest online food magazine. It didn't make headlines, but it made its way into inboxes, group chats, and Slack channels. It found an audience not in celebrity gossip circles, but among teachers, parents, and people who spent time in actual gardens. At the Montecito home, Meghan read the article on a Thursday morning while sipping herbal tea. She didn't tell anyone she had read it. But later that day, she walked into the kids' room, opened the closet, and pulled out Archie's slightly too big overalls. She folded them slowly and set them aside for Saturday. That evening, Harry came in from the backyard with dirt still on his hands. Meghan glanced at him and, without speaking, handed him a flyer she had picked up from the local bakery. It was an ad for a neighborhood craft fair. No press, no permits, no curated optics. Just hand-painted signs and folding chairs. He looked down at it, then looked up. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Saturday came. They didn't go to the market. They didn't bring signs or branding. They went to the fair with a basket of strawberries and a folding table that still smelled faintly of lemon oil. Julian watched from the window as they drove off. He didn't follow. He closed his laptop for the last time that afternoon. The little Roots folder was archived, its contents untouched. He didn't delete them. He just let them rest like seeds that weren't meant to bloom in this soil. And outside, under a striped tent in the corner of a humble fairground, Archie handed strawberries to a stranger and didn't look to anyone for approval. Not even once.